Hello and welcome to Planning for the Unexpected, episode 4 in our series presented by the Older Women's Network of New South Wales. I'm Amanda Armstrong and you can find all our episodes on the Older Women's Network website. Our expert guest is Alice Mantel. Alice is a specialist in elder law and family law, and she's the author of Every Woman's Guide to Retirement. Welcome, Alice.
Hi, Amanda, and welcome everyone.
Alice, you called this episode Suddenly Single. Now, why that title?
There was this one day when one of my friends was celebrating 50 years of married life, and I reflected on the fact, what would happen if you suddenly lost your closest friend after such a long time? How that person had been in your life and was such a vital part of your history, and suddenly they weren't there. How would you fill that space in your life?
Of course, it's a really sad and it's a devastating event. But I guess if you're in a couple, it's inevitable, isn't it? And it can happen suddenly and it can happen gradually. And so it's a hell of an adjustment either way. Today, we're welcoming your comments and your questions if you're watching live. And of course, our discussion as usual is general. And if you want some help, you can seek out one of the counselling services offered by not-for-profit agencies. Now, becoming single happens in different ways, Alice, doesn't it? There's death, as we just talked about, and of course there's separation and divorce.
Yeah, and unfortunately the divorce situation is far more likely to arise as we get older. In general, the age of divorce amongst all age groups has remained static, except for the over 50s. In that age group, it's a rising trend, and it's of divorcees, and it's a worldwide trend. It also relates to couples who've been in very long-term relationships, say over 20 years, who are divorcing.
Now that's interesting, a rise in the over 50 age group. Now, why do you think that's happening?
Well, grey divorces are pretty much worldwide. Most likely factors probably are that people are living longer after the age of retirement. Say at 65, they're likely to be living another 25 years. And so they've got time to think about the person they're living with. Then there's other factors like women are far more likely to be financially independent, and they've got a whole history of financial independence and being employed. So they're a lot more confident about facing the future as a solo traveller. And of course, there's still that old thing, that men suddenly have a midlife crisis and decide to leave. But in any sense, there's a fact that older men and women are far less likely to tolerate an unhappy relationship and might want either to be on their own or go look for a new revitalising relationship.
Now, do you think there's a difference, though, in choosing to leave a relationship, being left by the other partner, or, the partner dying?
Look, obviously there's an initial difference about whether it's voluntary or involuntary, and having a relationship ending when you don't expect it to. But over time, I'm not sure there is much difference. Let me say right now, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just looking at the legal aspects and practical aspects of what happens when a relationship ends.
Now, it is more common now, isn't it, for women to choose to leave a relationship than a male partner? Am I right about that?
I think in general terms that's true at any age, basically.
Are there any common characteristics when a relationship ends? And of course, we're talking about any kind of couple, same-sex, heterosexual couple, any kind of couple.
My theory is that even when you know that a relationship is ending for whatever reason, I think that there is grief. Grief is about the experience of loss of what used to be and what might have been. Even though in those situations of abusive and violent relationships, people remember, that it began in feelings of love and hope and an expectation of having a shared future.
Yes, I can understand grief in the context of a relationship breaking down, but in the case of an abusive relationship, is it really the same?
I still think there is loss, there's grief, there's loss, because it began people tend to remember the good parts of a relationship. And if you've got children, that just makes life more complicated because the children might still want to see the other partner. So it can be a complicated stage. And the fact is that people remember the good parts about being a couple. There's a lot of benefits to being part of a twosome, and it can be pretty tough being out on your own. I'm going to talk about the financial side, but ignoring that for the moment, being part of a couple at its best can be part of having someone to make decisions with you, and you're part of a social circle. You've got someone who'll stand up for you and support your point of view, and that's a great thing.
Now, let's talk about leaving a relationship voluntarily. You've thought about it over time. You've made a very, very big life decision. Are there any defining kind of characteristics?
All right, so the fact is that if you either side is thinking about leaving a relationship, and most times they're going to talk about it with each other, obviously, and then they're going to talk about it with their wider family. And this is where things can get complicated. So separation, how are you going to do that? What are you going to do in those big events, like family birthdays and Christmas, those sorts of events. And, the other part of the family might not accept things as they are. They might not accept having a new person in their group. The partner might take on a new partner. And sometimes people just find it too hard to tell the family, so they just separate under the one roof and lead basically independent lives rather than telling the family. I think all of the situations are different depending. But let me tell you a story. Very recently, I attended an event and I was speaking to a woman who I presume was a few years older than me. And she was telling me a story about her daughter, who was, I assume, somewhere in her early 40s. And her daughter had recently left her husband and took with her their two teenage children. One was 18, one was 16. And the lady I was speaking to was obviously quite upset that the family relationship had been destroyed, basically. And it was by her daughter. But she said, her daughter, before coming to this decision, her daughter said to her, I want my freedom. I want to be free from this man who is so judgmental of me and who criticizes me no matter what I do and has done this all my life. And I'm tired of the way he treats our daughter, because our daughter has been a vegetarian all her life, has made a very conscious decision. This is the 18-year-old, has made a very conscious decision she wants to be a vegetarian. And yet her father constantly wants her to eat meat. And this causes a lot of conflict. So obviously there are a lot of different characteristics when you're talking about it in each case. But separation has its own problems, in that how do you tell the family, how will the family react? What's going to happen at the family get-togethers? Where is it going to be? How is it going to be? What if the person who's left suddenly comes in with a new partner? How will they be accepted? Look, it can be a very difficult time with mixed feelings of anger, revenge, regret, all those things mixed up. It's not easy.
So let's say the couple has separated. What is our newly single person going to do now? What are the priorities, the practical priorities?
Look, the thing that will come up, the first thing will be the property. What's going to happen with the property. My advice to clients always was, try and keep the family property. If you can afford to stay in the family home and pay the mortgage, continue to stay there, because my view is that having a roof over your head is the most important thing in every woman's life. But, say they can't afford the mortgage, they can't afford to look after the house, or they just don't want to, then sell the property and buy something smaller. Doesn't matter if it's smaller, doesn't matter if it's in a less convenient area. Just make sure you have a roof over your head. And then the next thing is that in a long-term relationship, you're likely to have joint bank accounts, jointly own the car, joint insurance, joint rates. All of those things have to be closed off and, separated out. And of course, at this time, you will, of course, be thinking about reviewing your wills. And all of these things need to be changed when you take different paths.
And I guess this really underscores the importance of what we talked about in the last episode, that is being fully across all of your bank accounts, any investments that you might not really be aware of, your mortgage, all of those financial arrangements you really need to be familiar with. And also you need to have your paperwork up to date, as you were saying, your wills, in order to then do a new will as a single person.
Yep.
Alice, moving on from that scenario of separation and divorce, I'm wondering if becoming single can actually happen while you're still in a relationship, but your partner becomes seriously ill, chronically ill, because that changes the dynamics.
I think once that happens, I think there's a definite shift in the relationship. And look, it may not happen immediately, it may be a more gradual thing, but it becomes a change in the decision-making process, where you've both of you making a decision. The well person starts to make all the decisions. They may not actually be prepared to do that, but they might start to have to make decisions about healthcare, for example, now and into the future particularly.
And what are the other sorts of things that need to be considered?
Let me give you some examples about how this might start. You might suddenly notice that the other person becomes very forgetful, and that might start off fairly minor, but then the person's behaviour starts to change. So they might become quite aggressive at times, out of character. They might start to repeat the same story again and again and again. They might ask the same questions again and again. They might drive the car somewhere and not be able to remember how to get home. Until you've got, and even when you've got a formal diagnosis of dementia, the other person is already starting to take over some of those decision-making roles. And then that progresses on from making the decisions to starting to take the person to their medical appointments, for example, because you don't trust that person driving, for example. And then they make sure that the person is eating properly and that they're showered properly. So the nature of that relationship actually changes. The well person becomes that other person's carer.
And I'm sure people watching today many of them will understand how difficult that stage is. And sometimes it just gets too hard. It's very hard to be a carer, physically, emotionally, and that hard decision has to be made for your partner to go into care, and that changes things again.
Yeah, I think going into care is that first step towards that physical reality of becoming a single person, because literally the other person has moved into a residential facility and they're living somewhere else, they're being cared for on a daily basis, and they're being cared for by other people. But the person staying at home still has responsibilities. They're going to be looking after the bills still, the payments, they're going to pay for the aged care probably, they will be liaising with the family, they're probably going to be going to the residential facility and dealing with the medical decisions at that facility. And by that time, hopefully, your unwell person will have made all those important documents like the power of attorney and then enduring guardianship, so that the person that's left can actually make all the legal and financial decisions that need to be made.
And while death, of course, can come very suddenly, this stage can actually go on for quite a few years, can't it?
Yeah, and even when that end comes, we still might not be prepared, because there will be the funeral arrangements and making decisions about burial or cremation, and it's only when all of that is done that you really know that you are alone.
Now, of course, this is serious stuff, and it's sad, and it's difficult. But look, singlehood can lead to a new phase of life, a rich phase of life indeed. I thought we were going to have some uplifting discussion about being single, Alice.
I'm going to try. I think that you need to think about a transition from one to the other, really, before you can have that rich life. And I think actually taking a break is a not bad thing to do. Having a holiday or visiting some friends or giving yourself some time to reflect on that journey that you've been through. There's no need to rush this stage in a way. You've got at least 6 months to put in a probate application. So a proper break, from that period of grief should be a high priority in my view.
It's different for everyone, of course, but do you have any suggestions for, how best to handle this really big life transition?
I think you should take your time, basically. Before you make any big decisions, about selling, buying, moving, doing anything. It isn't unusual for children or other family members to say, why don't you move in with us? Because they feel sorry for you, of course. And they're being kind, there's no doubt about that. But I still wouldn't take that step immediately. You just need a bit of time to adjust to that situation and to figure out what you actually want.
Yeah, I think in my case, maybe a break of some sort, time away from the environment.
Yeah.
And then maybe you'd think, wow, is my house too big? Do I need to declutter? Do I need to move? This is a lot of space for me, and I'm surrounded by all of these memories.
Yeah. But I think there are some things that should be, first on the to-do list, really. And I think the first thing that most people actually do is to go through the other person's stuff, whatever that means. So it's clothes and shoes and personal items, but you're also starting to look at documents and to close off all those existing accounts and policies. You basically, and you have to look at things like the internet connection, like the Facebook accounts and the Instagram accounts, and you will need the person's death certificate to be able to do this. And after those, you've had your holiday and you've had a bit of a break, then you'll start to declutter, which I think is sensible. And you've got to get time to get used to the idea. And you're going to need to sort through the financial and legal documents anyway once you need to do the probate application. So remember that the probate application is the application to the Supreme Court so that you can administer the will according to whatever terms that have been made. And so you're probably going to need a bit of a lawyer to help you go through most of this.
Yes, you certainly need help to get you through this stage, which is really hard because you're grieving, but you've just got all these administrative tasks to deal with, and not everyone you deal with is sympathetic to all of the things that you're trying to close off and change and do over the phone or in person.
It's just difficult to find all those essential documents, like finding the will. Let's start off with there and then that, and then you start off with bank accounts, where are all the bank accounts, credit cards, passwords to get into the computer, very important things. And unless somebody is incredibly well organised, they may not have all of that readily available. So that actually is very time consuming doing that.
And there's the domestic things, what do you do with your partner's clothes? I know some people who just really need to get rid of them or, take them to Vinnie's or wherever very quickly. And then other people who just need to sit with them for a while, and sometimes quite a long time too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm into the, preserve this room never to be moved forever and ever. I don't think that's very good. And that certainly means it's hard to move on. But decluttering other people's items, I think, is you're allowed to take your time in doing that, because there's grief associated with, there's no need to rush about it. Perhaps it's important to start reconnecting with people, I think, accepting, any offers of help when they come from family and friends, and maybe starting to get a bit into, going out when you get invitations to go somewhere. It's a slow process, I think, and maybe if you need some spiritual help, and I think this is the time you're going to need it most.
And also there's the financial side. You've touched on that, and often in couples one person specialises, and there might be one person specialises in running all the money stuff.
That's true.
Right, and then you have to learn all that if you're not familiar with it. You have to understand your bank accounts, investments, superannuation, all of this stuff.
Yeah. Look, it's a very stressful time for anybody at this stage, but I'm really concerned about women who I think can be very vulnerable because they haven't had that experience. Many cases haven't had that experience of making investment decisions, and so they're not very well informed about financial investment options or making investment decisions. And I feel that often at this point, women can be very vulnerable to an opportunistic or a persuasive fraudster who comes along and says, look, you've got all this money but I can give you fantastic investment returns. And let me say, when I was a criminal lawyer many years ago, I certainly encountered this kind of situation where retirees suddenly had a lot of money in their lives, cash for various reasons, and they had been defrauded by convincing con men and women and lost their whole life savings. So it's a time for being careful about scammers.
Indeed. Now, getting back to our singleton, what are some of the ideas that our person could take up in order to move through this really big life transition?
Well, I always think that if there's one thing that women in a couple situation do really well, it is organise the social events. You know, they are really excellent networkers, and all they need to do is to bring that networking skill to the forefront in their single life. And the good thing, I think, is that often in relationships, women tend to suppress their own real interests and desires. And once they're single, then they can just follow their own real interests rather than pretending to be interested in somebody else's interests.
Yeah, I'd really encourage that. When I left full-time work, I took up full-time study, and that was a really enriching thing to do. And around that time, I also discovered OWN, which offers a whole gamut of really interesting activities. And I joined the theatre group there, and that really has taken me out of my comfort zone and introduced me to a whole new bunch of wonderful women. And I would encourage anyone to look at the OWN newsletter and see what's available, but it's a great way to meet people.
Yeah, I think those are excellent suggestions. Being connected with others and having a sense of purpose is the best thing we can do for ourselves. You're allowed to have fun. You're allowed to enjoy what you're doing. You don't have to just put up with slaving in a job anymore. And being able to contribute to other people, I think, is really important as well, because you've got life experience and work experience that you can contribute. And it's a great time to follow up on those interests that you had when you were younger and you never had time to follow them.
Now, as you age, it's a really, really important time to prioritise your health and your well-being. And now I'm delighted to welcome our special guest today, Pauline Manley. So over to you, Alice, to introduce Pauline.
Welcome, Pauline, to this podcast, which we have called Suddenly Single. So far in this conversation, my co-host Amanda and I have discussed some of the more serious aspects of that occur when a woman might lose her partner, either as a result of death or divorce. But now it's time to consider what our new singleton can do to make the most of herself in this new situation.
Well, it's very nice to be here, Alice. Thank you so much for asking me.
Now, I know some of our viewers will recognise Pauline as the Pauline Manley who runs both online and face-to-face classes known as New Moves. If you haven't participated in one of her classes, you are missing out on a great fun-filled experience that not only is doing you good, but makes you feel good as well.
Yeah, that's why I do them. I feel good after doing them, so I want to share that.
But, you know, Pauline, I know there's a lot more to you than just running dance classes. So I'm going to ask you to tell the audience a bit more about your background.
Oh, thanks, Alice. I've always danced, and I started, my life as a kind of experimental avant-garde dancer, performer, very involved in the experimental arts. And then in my 30s, I thought, oh, I better get a real job. And so I decided that I could meld my loves, and I went into academia. So I got my PhD in dancing consciousness, and I started teaching at various universities. And I really love teaching dance studies because you teach sort of the history of dance, the philosophy of dance, dance film. Lots of different people are interested in it, mainly women, even at a younger age, mainly women in Australia especially. But it was great fun to teach, and I really, really loved it. But God, the workload was really heavy. And when I got into my 50s, I thought, I don't want to work for an institution, or I don't want to work this hard anymore. So I decided to work for myself, start my New Moves Wellness program, and work with women my own age, more at a community level, more close to the ground.
Is that how you came to the Older Women's Network?
I was very attracted to the Older Women's Network. You know, they're one of the few organisations that advocate for older women. And it's really important that as women age, we really take care of ourselves. And I think places like OWN can bring us together in community and really help achieve some really good goals and offer some really fun activities too that have a lot of influence on our mental health.
Now, I am not really much of a dancer because I find it very hard to remember steps as well. Are your dancer classes the sort of thing I should be doing?
Look, you really don't have to remember steps in my dance classes. A lot of my classes are based on improvisation. So doing your own thing and self-expression, creativity. We do learn some choreography and we do learn some techniques, but there's no expectation that anyone masters these techniques. There's no mirrors in any space I teach. I don't want people looking at themselves and judging themselves. It's about how you feel. So I really say to people, it doesn't matter if you're not getting it right or whatever right is, you know. So I really emphasize that.
Do you think there's a difference having mature women there?
I God, I love dancing with mature women. I love it. I feel like we understand each other. I'm a mature woman. I'm 61 and I want to keep dancing as I age. And you know, mature women are wise women and we have wise bodies as well. And like we get told that our bodies are deteriorating or they're unattractive or they're not enough or they should be invisible. And I just sort of think that that's not the truth. You know, older women are wise women and so are our bodies.
So you've been running OWN classes for around 5 years, haven't you? Have you found in that time that women's reason for wanting to participate has changed at all?
I suppose during COVID it was about connection, and so it was the online classes, you know, and it was really important during COVID, but now there's more demand for face-to-face classes. And it's interesting because I feel like 50 and 60-year-old women are still kind of interested in physical health, muscular strength, that sort of thing, strong cores. And as women approach their 70s, they start to worry more about neural degeneration. And so we do a lot of work in the class about neural biology and how to grow your brain as you age. So I actually form classes around different kinds of neural stimulation, and it can be achieved really, really simply. And it's sort of like what's good for you. It's like a Brussels sprout wrapped in bacon. The bacon is the dancing, but the Brussels sprout is the neural research that goes on behind the scenes.
So does dancing help that Brussels sprout in your brain? I love that idea.
And look, the research is in. There's a lot of research being done on this, and initially the research really focused on choreographed dance as helpful for the patterning parts of our brain, so the more executive parts of our brain. But actually, improvised dance is really good for the motor parts of our brain, for the creative parts, for the two hemispheres talking to each other. So really, it's like this mixture in my classes of a little bit of choreography, a lot of self-expression. It's really designed to stimulate different parts of the brain. And we talk about parts of the brain like the basal ganglia that sort of regulates your rhythm and falls into habit very easily. So we do classes with irregular rhythms to surprise that part of your brain and kind of wake it up again. Because sometimes as we get older, we can become a bit habitual and life can become a bit smaller, which is nice in a way, but we don't want it to get too small and we want to try new things, experiment, open new neural pathways all the time.
And Pauline, I get the impression that in your classes, people actually get to talk to each other and discuss how things are going.
Well, that's right, because it's one of the pillars of these new moves classes is that we connect with one another. It's one of the reasons my classes tend to be a bit longer than a regular exercise class, which usually goes for an hour. So my classes usually go for 75 to 90 minutes. And
Oh.
that's because I want to include things like meditation, but also time for chatting, time for laughing. And I often even hold like regular afternoon teas, especially in Newtown face-to-face class afterwards, to so we can really get to know each other on another level as well and create a community. Because if you've got a community, you don't fall through the cracks. We notice if you're not there. We notice if you're feeling down, you know. So this is really, really important for the holistic sort of view.
Yeah, and I've noticed that one of the things that you do is to actually sort of wind down after the class. Is that what sort of things do you do with that?
Look, I am an absolute devotee of relaxation and meditation. And again, it's addressing people's mental health and their emotional health as well as their physical health. So I love the fact that after we say dance for an hour, we're very embodied beings. We're less intellectual. Our thoughts have slowed down, and it's just the perfect time for meditation. It's the perfect time for letting go and relaxing. And so I find that, you know, people really appreciate this sort of duality of lots and lots of movement and then stillness. And it throws it into relief, and it feels quite delicious to meditate or relax after a dance class.
There might be actually a lot of reasons why a women would want to take up your class because there's both aspects, you know, the movement and the meditation in the class.
Yeah, and again, that's like I said, that's why some of the classes are longer, so we can have that tail end. And it's like yoga classes always do this. They always have a shavasana at the end where you integrate what you've done, where you allow your body to sort of absorb what you've just done. Instead of rushing off to the next thing, we sit back, we meditate, sometimes we reflect on what we've done in the class. But I use lots of different meditation techniques, you know, and I firmly believe that meditation is a great thing to do as we are older and calmer and have a bit more time, but it's really good for mental health.
So that's one of the reasons you might recommend new moves for a suddenly single person.
Look, I just sort of think I try and take a holistic approach, but it's full of joy. Joy, joy, joy. And that's what we need as we get older. We need to create our joy instead of waiting for it to knock on our door. We create it. So, you know, we laugh, we dance, we're silly, we're creative, we're sensual, we're sexy, we shake our booty, and then we relax with each other. But you get to know people as well. And you know, I offer myself as an example of someone who's single. I've been married twice, and my husband died when I was young, and then the second relationship didn't work out in the long term. And I've never been happier than as a single woman at this age. And I'm really surprised because I got told that it wasn't going to be great and that aging's really hard and it's a deterioration. And I just don't feel like that at all. I feel like I've got so much more freedom. I don't care what other people think of me as much, and I love, love, love being with other women of my own age. You know, we laugh a lot.
Is there something you would say to someone, a woman who has become suddenly single? Now, you've had the experience of being single for some time, but for a woman who's become suddenly single, is there something you would say to her?
Look, a lot of my the women who come to my classes have lost husbands through death, and there is also divorce as well, which can be really traumatic in middle age. And it's not like you have to negate the fact that it's traumatic. It fills you with grief. It is really sad. But how do we feel those feelings but not let them overwhelm us? And this is one of the reasons, you know, I became a qualified counsellor as well. So I can actually talk to people with some surety about how to handle difficult emotions. And it's about allowing other emotions in and not becoming completely depressed through grief and separation and not having to be alone and offering a forum and a safe space where people can share, You know, you can share how you feel, you know, and a lot of women in these classes will understand. But also then let's just leave that alone for a while. Let's be silly. Let's do the Charleston. Let's do that as well. And of course we're going to feel sad, but as you know, there was one woman that came to my class that lost her husband, but also lost her daughter within a year of each other, and she was so bereft, but she was also angry and very bitter. And she started coming to the classes, and she was actually really difficult at the beginning. She was really difficult to deal with. And she just kept coming. For some reason, she kept coming. And now I've been with her for about 4 years, and the sweetness has returned. And she actually attributes it to dancing. She actually says that dancing sweetened her life again, allowed her to let go of some of the bitterness, some of the anger, and to actually realize in a very real way that you can be happy. You know, you can be happy again.
Pauline, you are such an inspiration. I'm so pleased to have shared this time with you. Thank you for sharing your joy and your love. I'm sure that our viewers will love to join your class. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Alice. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was really great, and I think some fantastic suggestions and encouragement there from Pauline. So Alice, as we wrap up today's episode, what are your ideas for really making the most of this stage of life, given that really women will mostly outlive men? I think it's by about 5 years. So what's your overall advice?
Obviously, I'm going to suggest that we need to be practical and deal with the legalities of the situation, but they're all and practical decluttering steps before you make any major decisions, and we've discussed all that before. However, I think from a personal perspective that it's important to focus on making a contribution to something that you really value, you know, a project or a person, and in that process staying connected with others. We all have skills and knowledge that we've acquired over a lifetime, and in work and in personal experience, and those are valuable assets that can be shared with others at this time. Our life experience helps us to understand the problems that face our children and our grandchildren and other young people as well. These are positive and enriching motivations for us as we move through these later years.
Thank you, Alice. And on those reassuring words, it's time to say goodbye from this episode, Suddenly Single, presented by the Older Women's Network of New South Wales. I'm Amanda Armstrong, and I hope you can join us next time when we're going to be talking about managing and caring for our aging parents. But bye for now.